true story. Last night I was actually in an Uber. It was an electric vehicle, and the Uber driver told me, you know, when the gas prices started going up, he did his math, and it was more economical for him to rent an EV, supercharge it every day, drive the 8 to 10 hours, because not only is it more cost efficient for him, but because all his customers preferred riding in an EV, he got better tips. So I thought that was a fascinating story about EV adoption here in the Houston region. And it's a true one, because you know I'm a journalist, so we only tell the truth. I'd like to invite our first panel, Achieving Equitable eMobility, to the stage, moderated by Grace Millsap, Director of Equity and Investment for Evolve Houston.
All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to our first panel, Achieving Equitable eMobility. I'm Grace Millsap, the Director of Equity and Investment at Evolve. And I'm really excited to be here with all of you today. We're really excited to launch the microgrant initiative. The team has been working really hard over the last few months to set up the equity program and get funding for this so we can connect those dollars to the communities and really facilitate that community-driven transportation system. So we have 40 minutes for our panel today, so I won't spend too much time speaking, but I do want to introduce our amazing panelists in order of appearance. I'm just gonna kind of look down the row. We have Brian Carroll with Metro, and then we have Emily Long with BP. We also have Terry Travis with EV Noir, Priya Zachariah with the City of Houston, and Andrew DeCandis with HGAC. All right, so we've been using the word equity and equitable eMobility a lot today, so I really want to start off with, getting the groundwork, making sure we're all on the same page about what is equitable eMobility. So I'm going to turn this over to our panelists and ask, what is equitable eMobility, what is equity, and how is your organization working to promote the adoption of electric vehicles and all other forms of electromobility? So Priya, do you want to kick it off?
Sure, I wasn't expecting. Can you all hear me? Yes. Okay, difficult to tell, but thank you so much. It's a great honor to be on the panel with so many of the partners that we regularly work with. So when I think about eMobility, on behalf of the city and the Office of Resilience and Sustainability, I think what we like to think about is eMobility and equity within eMobility is no different from equity in mobility in general. So what we are thinking about is affordability. We are thinking about access, and that's physical access. That's also socioeconomic access, and not to forget reliability, because mobility is that kind of connective tissue where you're connecting people and places. You're essentially connecting, and if you want to think about from the people perspective, you're connecting people to jobs, to housing, to recreational, educational opportunities. You're connecting them to prosperity, really, to upward mobility, no pun intended. So when we think about e-mobility and equity, it's very not different from thinking about equity and mobility in general.
Thank you.
Absolutely, Priya, and removing those barriers, and frankly, the work that we're doing at Metro, very excited about, and we're promoting a number of different activities that we have going on. Work with Dr. Race on National Science Foundation, University of Houston, to understand how we can impact and use our facilities best for equitable access to electric vehicles. A couple of things on this one in particular that I wanted to mention, the work that we've done with U of H. We also had a people mover, automated, fully electric people mover that we operated on the Texas Southern University campus prior to the pandemic. And then following that, we have a second phase of that pilot where it's a larger automated electric vehicle that will service University of Houston, Texas Southern University, and also the Third Ward, which is also a complete community. And then, of course, we have some of those things that have been making headlines, 20 battery electric buses that we're anticipating starting to receive those this year, and deploying those to 2 routes that predominantly serve complete communities as well. On top of that, staff pool vehicles that we're using, fully electric pool vehicles, and then 10 cutaway buses that are complement our Metro Next, or I'm sorry, the Metro Solution. I apologize. Their community connector services as well.
I would jump in and just say that when we think about eMobility equity, three things come to mind: addressing transportation burden, economic inclusion, and then public health. One of the things that we know is that most major cities are burdened by, in communities in those cities, because of historic and systemic inequities, are burdened by poor air quality, transportation burden, and being left out of this economic transition. And so I think that with the eMobility transition that we're all experiencing, we have the opportunity to have a triple bottom line opportunity to really engage in all three facets of that in a real world different way, understanding the historic and systemic inequities that have plagued communities for a number of decades.
So I'm going to be bold and say equitable eMobility is literally my job, and it's why I love my job, right? Because it connects what impacts the planet, what impacts my personal passions about thinking about society and not just individual customers. So at BP, we announced a new purpose 3 years ago, and that is to reimagine energy for our people and our planet, right? Which is a pretty bold statement. But in service of that, in the mobility space, we've said we want 100,000 charge points globally by 2030. And in my job, I get the pleasure of saying, okay, as we're thinking about that, how do we do it in a way that really is about a just energy transition? How do we think about getting power and energy to everybody? And that is the core of what I think of when I think about this space.
And just to back up, I mean, from the Houston-Galveston Area Council perspective, we look at this both from a policy perspective and from a funding perspective. So working to educate folks around the region, working to educate our stakeholders, which are local governments and local corporations, and then working to ensure that there's funding and to help develop and execute funding opportunities to help fund electric vehicles and other clean transportation technologies in a way that helps expand them and helps make them available for everyone.
Thank y'all for all of your answers. I think, at Evolve, we really agree with a lot of the points you guys have made. And also just flag me down if I don't speak into the microphone. But yeah, I think, advancing equitable eMobility or eMobility equity is not, just about clean transportation. It's about that economic expansion. It's about, providing those job opportunities. Dr. Quentin Wright said a lot of really great things when he spoke earlier. So I hope you guys don't hate me. I know I said I was going to go in order, but I think I want to kind of skip around a little bit because I think you all made a lot of really good points, and I want to get us all on the same page. So I really want to talk about why eMobility equity is important, for those points y'all have made, for the improved air quality, for the distribution of transportation burdens and benefits, and that economic development side of things as well.
I'll start here. Whenever, the way I think of it is, we put an electric bus on a route, and we're then removing that point of emission that would have been diesel or internal combustion engine. And so we're cleaning the air every time that we run cleaner service, and then every time someone rides with us, they're no longer polluting as well. So we feel like there's a direct impact to the communities that we operate in just by having zero emissions at that point. And then from the workforce part, we give, Dr. Wright is training them and bringing them up, and we give them a place to work. And we're happy to apply those, or give the workforce a place to apply those skills, gain further knowledge, and improve their work as well.
And I think, I think to Brian's point, I think a lot of folks probably out in the audience are thinking of eMobility as passenger cars, and which is a huge and growing part of that. But I think there are a lot of additional opportunities in the freight space, as well as like with Metro and other sort of heavy duty vehicles that are going to help take emissions off the road. Our region has one of the largest ports in the nation. We're number one in the amount of, or the cost of shipping within the country. Somewhere around 42% of our jobs within our region are specifically related to freight. So it's a huge industry within our region. And so I think a big part of this moving forward is ensuring that not just that people have access to charging and that we have light duty electric vehicles. We have to look at the heavy duty part of that solution and try to help companies move forward to help electrify or have some other low emission technology as part of their activities, and make sure that they have the ability, they have the knowledge to make that transition. They have the expertise on staff, whether that's from a mechanic point of view or from a fleet management point of view, and we want to make sure that they have that we decrease the barriers. So whether that's additional funding or helping them set up the kind of facilities that might help make it easier to introduce those sorts of technologies into their operations. So it's more than just the passenger space, and I think that there's a lot of work that can be done in that, and I know Metro's in the process of doing a lot of that, and others on this panel are as well.
So I want to kind of build off what you said, Andrew, and I completely agree, and I think that's a very beneficial perspective to kind of bring to the, what we are talking about today. There is a lot of focus on, the electrification of passenger cars. But I think I would like to encourage and underline to all of us that we think about it more holistically when we think about mobility. It's not just about the individual passenger vehicles. It's mass electrification of the mass transit fleet is really important. Metro has 1,000+ buses, I think, Brian. HISD is another big, on the public sector side, a big fleet owner. Our taxi fleets, if you look at big employers like Amazon and their delivery vehicles. And then on the other end of the spectrum, if you start to think about micro-mobility and first and last mile connections, when you get off your bus, how you're going to get to your final destination. Can we electrify that piece of it, like electric scooters, electric bikes, and e-bikes, and so on? So I think it really is important to think about, I think one of the speakers, pre-mimosa break that we had, the pre-mimosa speakers, someone mentioned ecosystem. So I think I would like to encourage, and let's all have this takeaway that when we think about e-mobility and electrifying mobility, let's think about it as an entire ecosystem and across multiple scales on the spectrum.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And I think that we're moving towards an all of the above future. Yes. Not just gasoline cars, not just cars, but a sort of a panoply of different options that people can take to help decrease their emissions and help sort of move into a better transportation space.
I would agree. I think that the future is multimodal. So as we begin to approach this, I couldn't agree more with my panelists. I just returned from Oslo, and one of the things I was just saying to Ryan earlier, that there are a lot of similarities between Oslo and Houston in the sense that Oslo is financing a number of their mobility initiatives through oil revenue, and they're investing heavily into multimodal electrification so that all facets of their communities, whether they're in rural communities, whether they're in urban cores, are benefiting from this clean transportation future. And so as we think through what this looks like, it should really be this multifaceted, multimodal approach that really provides access to everyone and meets them where they are. Sometimes we, those of us that work in this space, overcomplicate it. If we begin to talk to communities and meet them where they are and really provide and are listening more than we're talking, we'll get a lot of insight into what communities need. We've worked on a number of projects that we went in and our partners were like, oh, we're going to deploy, electric vehicle car share programs in agricultural communities across the country. What we found is that in many instances, these communities had a number of individuals that were unbanked. So the idea of putting a credit card into an app and system and providing charging, that just wasn't the solution. And what we found is that from talking to the community, they were more apt to have, utilize e-bikes as a mode of transportation for that first and last mile transportation. And so I think that as we move forward in this space, it really comes down to really having a human-centric, community-centered approach in moving this multimodal future forward.
I love that, because the way I'm thinking about it, and going back to your question of why is it important, I think we're all part of society, whether it's us as individuals or it's our companies. All of the elements on that are part of society, right? That's why this topic is so important, because it's about every individual, every community, every company, and it's about how do we make an impact and how do we make the world a better place. And so that's why this topic is important, to answer your original question. And it's really important to me as we think about deploying infrastructure and thinking about it being multimodal, and it's not going to turn on a dime. We're not going to have 100% electric vehicles tomorrow. It's not just about past cars, as we said earlier. We invested in a company called Amply Power last year because we said, how are we going to make an impact on the environment? It's going to be through fleets first, right? Those are the ones with the highest emissions. It's the buses, it's the big vehicles. So how do we think about helping them along the journey faster, and how do we make sure how they deploy their vehicles is in the most energy efficient manner, right? It's not just about, I'll sell you an electron. How do I optimize your electron so that you're minimizing the impact that transport and that mobility has? And those topics are basically what we think about I think everyone on this panel thinks about every minute of the day.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think something that as you guys were speaking, that I thought about, speaking to that original question of, why it's important. I think transportation has a huge impact on just the way that we move in society. No pun intended. But with that, I read a study from Harvard actually that says commute time is the #1 indicator of someone's, position or ability to, move upward in society. So I think, when we're talking about electrifying transportation and multimodal transportation options, it's really important to speaking to Priya's point, having those first last mile solutions, making sure that people have those connections so that they can go access their jobs or education or a park. I think all of that, has something to do with our personal well-being as well as our economic and financial well-being, and that's on an individual level and, on a societal level. So with that, I think a lot of the points you guys made kind of make me want to, again, go out of order. But one of the points that Emily just made actually was, that community-driven process, which I think is important because, we know how we move in society, and I say I'm saying society a lot, but I also mean, just within the city and, across the country. But, we don't have, insight into everyone's every day. So how do we achieve equitable eMobility? How do we, equitably electrify transportation, and who is necessary to achieve that?
So, I think Terry said it right. It's about us going into those communities. It's about recognizing that the people in society aren't just us, and we don't necessarily reflect everyone. And it's important, and it's funny because it's perfect timing that you asked the question. I literally sent my team out the last 3 weeks to just drive the US. Like literally I had people driving every coast, and we drove thousands of miles in electric vehicles, just talking to people, whether it was at a charging station or it was in a community or whatever, just to understand how the individuals in the community are thinking about the transition. What do they need? Do they need an e-bike? Someone said earlier, do they need a bus, right? How do they want to be moved? Do they want AVs, right? Because the benefit of coming from a large company, I think about going to startups all the time, but is that we've got the funds. So BP has a ventures group that invests $200 million a year, and we invest in all of these new technologies, and allows us to say, okay, I just heard that someone really is, it's really important to this community to have more e-bikes. So why don't we go invest in those companies? Why don't we help those companies deploy more in that particular community? Because not one solution is going to fit for everyone, but if you kind of do the multimodal, you talk to all the communities, you can solve more problems by understanding what those individuals need.
Yeah, excellent points. And Terry and I were talking backstage as well. And it is about the individuals in the communities. And at Metro, we have a public engagement team, and had the pleasure of working with them recently on the stuff that we're doing with the National Science Foundation and the University of Houston. Had a street team there talking with individuals, but then also working through the organizations that represent those communities, the work that Terry's doing, essentially the work that Evolve's doing, and understanding, hey, here's what the priorities are, here's what the needs are, and then being able to respond to those needs most effectively. And then it's the policymakers too, so who's involved, and we're seeing a lot of support right now to put policies in place to help us do a once-in-a-lifetime, or considering the climate impacts, maybe once for a lifetime type investment that we're seeing right now.
So I think to your answer, who do we need at the table to achieve equitable e-mobility? And I think the answer is expansive, because we need everyone at the table. And I think the event today, and congratulations to the whole team, to the board, to Evolve, and this was a fantastic event. And I think it's a testament, just the diversity of folks that we've heard from and in who they represent. It's a testament to the fact that multiple voices need to be joined in kind of moving us, the city, the region, and every household forward into equitable e-mobility, and to be part of that equation. But to be a little bit more specific, I mean, we have the city, we have the folks who are going to help us find the funding at the regional level, so that's the Metropolitan Planning Organization. You have the big transit providers, you have the private sector. You have Centerpoint and the utilities represented here. So if you look at the entire kind of the gamut of things that need to happen, it's the funders, it's the folks who are going to help us find the power in the grid and make sure that the grid is ready for this vehicle-to-grid transition that we'll be doing. It's also the workforce development with the universities, and our office is working right now with HCC in trying to embed the ideas of resilience in actual curriculum that HCC is going to be delivering to the community. So workforce development is a big part of it. And research and innovation is a huge part of it. And I think through all of these efforts, the thread that we need to always pull through as individual agencies and actors is the voice of the community. And I think we are going to be working very closely, as we have in the past with Evolve and with your leadership, Casey, as well, to kind of find that opportunities to educate, create awareness, and engage with the community to create community adoption of electric vehicles.
And I think that's a really good, I think HGAC, my organization, is in a really good position to help with a lot of this work. If you're not familiar with the Houston and Galveston Area Council, we're the local council of government for a 13-county region. We're also the local metropolitan planning organization for an 8-county region, which is Harris and all the surrounding counties. And we work, basically what we do is we work on problems that are larger than any single government can work on. So we work on regional issues. We're a proponent of regionalism. And I think being able to work with all of these different organizations and to sort of help bring those together and ensure that funding is available and funding is developed in the right way, I think is something that, because I think really this is a regional issue. And this is something that we need to look at larger than just a Houston thing. It's larger than just a Harris County thing. It's the entire Gulf Coast region. And I think that, being able to have that position, being able to push that and being able to work towards these regional solutions, I think is sort of is one way to help make this happen. And I'm hopeful that in the future we can continue to work with organizations like City of Houston and Metro and corporations to try to help develop all of these issues that we're discussing: the education issue, the funding issue, the equity issue.
Alrighty. Thank y'all again. So just based on y'all's answers, I kind of have a question of my own to slip in, but don't worry. I'm sure you have the talking points for it. So with all of the work you guys are doing to promote clean transportation and in doing so in an equitable way, I'd love to hear a little bit more about how you see that multimodal transportation functioning in the future, either on a personal level or on a organizational level. Like, I know you guys have spoken to what you're doing now, but where do you hope to see that go? What's the end goal with that?
I'll start with this one too. Well, at Metro our board approved a climate action plan early this year, and it's built on our sustainability vision statement, which essentially has 5 goals. The first of that being purchase only zero emissions vehicles by 2030. So I think for us, it's a full transition to clean technologies, and there's a direct impact, as we talked about today, in the communities that we operate in, and providing that safe, reliable, and efficient transportation.
And I think thinking from a resilience point of view, this is just and this is my own personal opinion. I think everything moving forward has to be looked at in that resilience and sustainability lens, and trying to push forward along those lines will start to open up the ability for us to thinking along that line. We can start to put together solutions that help ensure that economically the region prospers in the future, that we can weather storms, that we can continue to ensure that the work that we're doing as a city can continue and can keep moving forward. And I think so looking at it in that lens, from that resilience and sustainability lens, I think is key. And I know that's something that's near and dear to your heart, Priya.
Yes, absolutely, for sure. For the office, for the city of Houston, I'm going to just add one more thing to your question, Kate, Grace. In addition to having the end goals, I mean, we have the goal within the Climate Action Plan, net zero by 2050. Metro has goals in their Climate Action Plan. Evolve has goals. It's 50 by 30. Is that right? The hashtag. But I think in addition to that, us as different actors in the operationalizing of resilience and sustainability and actual accomplishment of the goals, I think it's really important that our individual visions and goals speak to one another. And that is the immense value of an organization like Evolve, where multiple agencies and agents of change are coming together, kind of unified within this, kind of common vision setting. I think for instance, the city of Houston also does this within all of our departments and our plans. We have the Resilient Houston Plan, we have the Climate Action Plan, and the two constantly reference each other. And the work of that, of addressing both resilience and sustainability with the mayor's vision of bringing those offices together is a huge plus in taking a more holistic look at both of those, kind of the intentions under both plans. We also work with the Complete Communities Plan. So within the city as an organization and outside of the city with our individual organizations to have this alignment with our goals and kind of reflect that in how we operationalize it on a day-to-day basis, I think that's also just as important as having those goals.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think, as you said, it's really important that we align. So BP's sustainability frame is around getting to net zero in 2050. We can only do that if we support Mayor Turner, other cities, other regions in their goals to get to net zero by 2050. And we support our customers, whether they have the goal or not, but we support our customers in that transition. Part of our sustainability frame is about caring about people and improving their lives and caring about the planet and improving the planet, right? And we can only do those things in partnerships as we think about groups like Evolve. One of the things that we've done is, and we're not the only ones, but we've partnered with Uber. And almost every meeting I have with Uber is about how do we think about equitable mobility? How do we think about getting their drivers who might not otherwise have access to chargers, right? It's all of those pieces and aligning everyone on this panel, everyone in this room on a common goal, a common vision, and headed in the same direction.
Yeah, I would also say that going back to the resiliency vantage point, there's a clear opportunity that we have in front of us, and I think we need to just move expeditiously. Yesterday was 100 degrees, and there have been several other days that are 100 degrees, and the idea is that, we're seeing, from a climate vantage point, we're seeing things change and evolve. It's, no matter what side of the aisle folks fall on, reality is reality, and the idea is that we have to move through a more resilient lens, and also we just need to make sure that those in communities that are underrepresented have a seat at the table and able to provide input. We also work with Uber on a number of their decarbonization strategies, as well as a number of delivery network companies. And one of the things that is very clear is that many of the drivers that are on all of those platforms many of the folks are coming from underrepresented communities, and there has to be a real strategy. If Uber and Lyft have announced that by 2030 to operate a vehicle on their platforms, you have to be driving an electric vehicle, and we know that 60, almost 70% of their drivers are coming from Black and brown communities, and then we know that my team was in prep for this. They identified 5 different zip codes in the metro area that didn't have any access to charging, and the median household income was below $29,000. And so the idea is that we move forward in this, clean transportation system. How do we begin to make sure that it's accessible? As we talk about equity, how do we make sure that it's accessible for all folks? And as we think about the F-150 and all the vehicles that are in the lobby, there's an opportunity to use those vehicles as grid assets so that, during an outage or a rolling brownout, the idea is that some of those households that may not have the most energy efficient homes can benefit from this clean transportation, vantage point through a way that we haven't imagined before. We're working with some folks, the transit agencies in Florida on some innovative charging hub ideas that literally we think could be rolled out across the country. And I think it's going to take innovation, resiliency, engaging with communities and all the above to really make sure that we're on a clear path forward.
Yeah, I totally agree with all of y'all's points, and I think the big takeaway from that for me is setting those goals, but also using that connection with the community to set those goals. Like we can align all of our plans, we can have conversations like this, and it's very, very important. But at the end of the day, if you don't go into the community and see what they want and what they need, it doesn't really matter. So we're coming up on the end of the panel. This is my last question. And it's kind of a two-part question, because I do think it's important to use, that connection with the community to set those goals. So I want to ask, with me softballing it up like that, how does your organization evaluate equity, and why are you choosing to evaluate it that way?
I'll jump into this. So, we have a service and fair equity policy and guidance, particularly with our federal partner, Title VI guidance, that provides a very technical approach to equity and to our service. So any changes that we're making, any investments that we're making in the community, and that includes a public input piece as well, which is a cornerstone of it. But understanding whenever we change that service, what is the impact to communities and their makeup? I think metrics that I consider quite important are the climate action plan goals and the initiatives within that, and making sure that we are achieving those things that we set out in front of us. And then NEPA as well, which is the National Environmental Policy Act. And anytime we make a capital investment, we go through that environmental assessment process and understand the impact in the community, and that's a metric that we evaluate and change our plans based on community input within those activities.
So I'll jump in and just say one of the things that we've done, we're working with a number of organizations, so the 25 largest cities, a number of governor's offices, the newly formed joint office, the Justice 40 Committee, a number of other entities. And one of the things for us that came up over and over is how do we do just that? How do we provide metrics that are measurable and actionable? How do we make sure that as we talk about this, there are a lot of folks that are using the equity word as a buzzword, but when you ask them, what is that? How do you operationalize that? How is that realized in your organization? A lot of folks give you the deer in the headlights. And so the idea is that one of the things that our organization has done is develop an equity and a mobility scorecard. So we're working with cities, organizations, and we do internal as well as external facing research to help those organizations understand that if you are a large size company, small size company, an NGO, a green, and you're talking about eMobility equity, this is how you can measure that, because if you don't have folks that are reflective of communities working on these projects, if you don't have, it's beyond just putting steel in the ground or vehicles on the road. There's a lot more that goes into it. And so creating these equity and mobility scorecards has been very beneficial to us to help organizations see exactly where they are, as well as communities, so that as they move forward, they'll be able to understand where the gaps are.
So I'll jump in and say that, when it'll give me a little bit of a chance to kind of educate on both of the plans that our office is responsible for implementing, so the Resilient Houston Plan and the Climate Action Plan. And we've had numerous conversations around this with, I'm sure many of you all already know this, we have about 300 actions if you look at both plans holistically, which means that the implementation necessarily has to be a priority-driven approach. So we've spent a lot of months taking a look at what could be that strategic roadmap, and what are some of the criteria that we want to think about when we say that this is a priority in the plan. And one thing we kept away from is actually looking at what has more of a contribution to climate and resilience outcomes, because both of the plans in their entirety are based on that one unifying factor. So the criteria that we used in our office to kind of identify high-level priorities, equity is one of the foremost criteria. And we took a look at not just where equity is mentioned in the plans very explicitly. For instance, I think Action 39 is about developing equity indicators, having an equity definition for the city of Houston, and an equity atlas. And I want to give a shout out to the planning department, who I think some folks from our planning department are here. They're the ones leading the charge on that. But beyond that, we took a look at actions that had the potential to be deployed equitably in the community. And one of those is front and center, eMobility. Can we put chargers in communities and create more access to affordable, reliable eMobility solutions, both from an individual auto perspective, but also working with folks like Metro, thinking about first and last mile, thinking about Metro's universal accessibility program, thinking about working with Metro and making sure that it is not just frequency and revenue hours on high frequency routes that are prioritized, but also coverage routes that serve a lot of our under-resourced communities. So there's a whole gamut of things, but I think under the unifying thread in many of those conversations has been equity. And just to round out the answer, a couple of other things that we think about in prioritizing the actions in our plans is workforce development, is whether we have, and just to be a little bit more pragmatic, two other criteria that we kind of are holding up. One is funding pathways. I mean, at the end of the day, we do need resources to come to the table to make these things happen. And the last one we look at is implementation momentum. When and where we can partner or leverage on existing momentum, and that brings equity and workforce development into the picture. Those are the things that we want to kind of prioritize.
So we do have metrics like we're going to get to $1 billion in spend with diverse suppliers, but that's kind of boring. So I'm going to bring it up a level and just kind of say the way we think about measuring, every time we do a project, I think we ask 5 questions, and I'm going to read a little bit just because I'll get it wrong if I don't. Have we improved access to energy for people? Are we supporting a just energy transition? So back to the whole theme of this panel, are we doing the transition in a way that actually considers people in a just way? Are we treating people with respect? Are we supporting health, well-being of those individuals? And are we enhancing diversity, equity, and inclusion? So all of our metrics will feed into those, but at the end of the day, the questions we ask ourselves as we think about projects, as we think about investments, are those 5 to ensure that we're thinking about the individuals in the communities.
Yeah, and I just sort of, at HJC, I think that we're working really hard right now. We're on an equity policy. We're certainly committed to making sure that we meet our requirements under Title VI, but I think we're moving forward on trying to put together a sort of more holistic equity policy that I think that process is getting ready to come to its conclusion. But we're already sort of looking ahead beyond that to try to figure out how the tenets that we're putting together through that project can be applied to other projects, to future funding projects, to some of our planning processes as well, to make sure that that's sort of included in everything that we do. And so for us, it's a work in progress still, but I think that it's moving forward, and I think it's going to be very helpful and help add additional dimensions to the work that we do. But it's still in process. It's a work in progress.
And one last thing I want to add. One of the things that we've done also to make this measurable, I would be remiss if I didn't mention this. We actually launched a national eMobility Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Conference where we've had speakers like Secretary Granholm, members of Congress, Administrator Regan from the EPA, Houston's own Dr. Bullard, who is a authority and mainstay and one of our mentors as it relates to environmental justice as well. So I would all encourage you all to attend that conference. It's October 19th. It'll be virtual, and then October 20th will be in DC at the National Press Club.
Alrighty, so I think that is all the time we have for our amazing speakers today. So I'd love to give them a round of applause because we appreciate them. Thank you all so much for coming and answering all of my questions. And to everyone out there, also thank you for coming and listening, and stick around for our next panel on EV infrastructure.
All right. Thank you, guys. Thank you all for sticking around. Big thanks to the guy, and you guys can go stage that direction. Big, because always like, what do you mean, which is stage right? Actually, big applause to the guy in the sparkling red jacket down. Like a fashion message. Now that's truly, I mean, come on. That's really good. Thank you all to our wonderful panelists. Now, last but not least panel is the panel that stands between you and lunch. I'd like to invite our second panel titled Expanding the State of EV Charging Infrastructure. And the final group of speakers today, moderated by Harry Tannenbaum, Director of Commercialization and Infrastructure at Evolve Houston.
Thanks, everyone. And I'm joined here by Michael Chamberlain from TxDOT, Suresh Rajagopalan from Electrotempo, Leslie Cummings from CenterPoint Energy, Ken Karan from NextEra Energy Resources, and Travis Sheehan from Shell US. Awesome, great. So we'll start with Michael. I know you spoke earlier about TxDOT and what this statewide EV charging infrastructure plan means here, or across the state. But can you speak a little bit about what the plan will mean here in Houston?
Sure, it's a good question. So the first thing I think of is timing, right? And I touched on that before, but there's some things we have to do before we get to the rural and urban areas. But when we went through the plan, we knew that we were going to have to engage our local planning partners. And we knew we were going to have to come up with some way to allocate funds between the urban and the rurals. So at TechSide, we have lots of programs already that do that type of thing. Our Unified Transportation Program is one of them. So we copy the formula and then modify from that formula to come up with an allocation per vehicle. And it's a combination of population, VMT, lane miles, EV ownership, and then non-EV area. And using that formula, we came up with an allocation. There's a table published in the plan. I think the HGAC area comes out to about 63, 64, 65 million over the 5-year period after we finish the algorithm. So what that means, what does that mean? So it's going to be determined by the locals, but you'll be able to slice that up any way you want. So if you want more DC fast charge stations, you want level 2 stations, more fleet, that's going to be up to you guys. So there are some stipulations on how that money should be, stations should be made to the public 24/7, should have accessibility, lighting, connectivity, things like that. But we're really holding that off until we get to the point where we have a good handle on the interstates. And then we'll engage with the local partners through the NPOs, through the cities, to do that work. It's not going to be overnight. I wish it was tomorrow. That raise my hand and one of the loudest speakers in the department's like, let's do this now. But there's just a thing ahead of us that we have to do first before we get to that point.
That's great. And I know I've read the plan quite a few times. I imagine not very many people in the audience have read the plan as many times I have. It was 50 pages before there were comments in there, and I think now it's about 80.
Please read the comments.
They're great. But you mentioned this immediacy, right? And working on the AFC first, the interstates first. Can you speak a little bit to the timeliness of it? Obviously, we don't have a need today for all these chargers, but as we reach our 50 by 30 goal and as EV adoption continues to increase, what does that look like in terms of infrastructure deployment?
So one of the things we had to do was, as part of the plan, was to gauge how quickly the vehicles are coming to Texas. So we published a registration dashboard with our partners at NCT that gave us an idea of how many per week are coming to Texas. And it's anywhere from 1,500 to 2,000 per week. And so the vehicles are coming. It's 150% more, I think, than last fiscal year. Department of Motor Vehicles publishes a report every fiscal year. I think there was 60,000 in the last fiscal year. At the end of this fiscal year, there'll be almost 160,000. So the vehicles are coming. So there is a need for charging. It needs to be, our charge was to make sure that it was statewide connected, and you'll see that in the governor's letter that's posted on the website, to be able to connect all the rural and urban areas. So the plan, as we tell folks, it's $400 million, it's about $100 million in investment funds. That's not enough to cover the entire state if all the vehicles are electric tomorrow. It's just not. We think it's good enough for about 1 million vehicles, give or take, how it's sliced up. But we think that's the target. It's anyone's debate as to how fast we get to 1 million. So we're at 140,000, 150,000 now, we increase 1,500 to 2,000 per week. You can do some math, but it's not linear, right? It's not. So it's anybody's best guess when we're going to get there. But we're going to try to make it merge as close as possible to when the infrastructure starts coming out on the interstates, to the rural areas, to the urban areas, to when those numbers start to increase, so that people can drive from one part of the state to another and not have to think about it. They just get in their car, they tell the car where they want to go, or they just figure it out and they go. Just like you do now, you don't have to think about it. Just we put all that energy into making the road safe, personal, and connected. You don't have to think about it. The same thing to 100. That's a good thing.
Are there anything to add? Comments on TechSod? Awesome, great. So my next question is for Suresh. And for Electrotempo, who has been a really critical player in helping Evolve figure out what infrastructure will be required here in the Houston area, can you give a little bit of an overview of what Electrotempo does and how it's helping solve these infrastructure requirement questions?
Sure. Thanks, Harry. So as you mentioned, we worked very closely with your team as part of the RISE report that came out last year. Our approach has been to look at the entire travel demand, not just the EV demand or the EVs that are in the market. What does the current travel demand look like irrespective of the vehicle that is being used, which includes the trip information, what is the starting point, what is the destination point, where do they travel through, because that helps us to accurately model and simulate the charging demand for the future, right? So travel demand to charging demand is our approach. In addition to that, what we do is we also look at a lot of the equity and demographic parameters, particularly that were highly discussed in the previous panel, right? The next big aspect is the Justice 40, which is the new legislation. We take into account the Justice 40 requirements and considerations, and that data set also plays a big part in determining if we are deploying the infrastructure equitably in all the disadvantaged places. Because if we see today, I think the current charging infrastructure is highly skewed towards high net worth and corporations, right? And so the output that we helped evolve with in the study is not only about the home demand, but also what is going to be the public demand, what is also going to be the commercial demand. I think we help to simulate all that so that the charging infrastructure is evenly determined in all the places that it will be required.
That's great. And right, you can't really only think about the vehicles themselves. You have to think about obviously where they're driving, where they live, or where the cars live, and where the people who drive them live. And then also some component of access to charging demand.
Yes.
If you have a lot of EVs in an area that may not have high access to at-home charging, that should reflect in a model. And you'd have to understand where those people still have to charge their cars. So figuring out how that charging demand is going to be distributed.
Yes. We have to consider, for example, I know we were talking backstage about multifamily units, right? So it's not possible to put infrastructure. They can't have it like a single family home or a townhome. So then what do you do? We kind of pink those parameters in the nearby parking lots, nearby, for example, transit centers or government-owned properties where potential charging locations can be possible, right? So we kind of help to parameterize all those options so that we simulate it as accurately as possible from an infrastructure standpoint.
And it definitely sounds like there's opportunities for commercial partners as well, right, to host public charging on their property.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. Anything to add? Great. So I want to switch gears a little bit. I'm the director of commercialization infrastructure. We've talked a lot about infrastructure. So now to come to the commercialization side, Leslie, we worked with you last year to help CenterPoint develop its fleet electrification strategy. We worked really closely with Kent's organization to do an assessment on the fleet and figure out what electrical feasibility would look like for CenterPoint's fleet. Could you walk us through maybe CenterPoint's decision to electrify and how that strategy was developed over time and how those goals were set?
Sure. So we have a goal at CenterPoint to electrify 100% of our sedans and SUVs by 2030. And what we did is we've pulled together a project team that includes stakeholders and subject matter experts from various departments, fleet, facilities, regulatory, finance, marketing, to help come together and look at this from a strategy of execution perspective. And so we have about 4,600 fleet vehicles. The large majority of those are huge bucket trucks. So the subset of what we're trying to electrify at this point is smaller, but hopefully as technology changes over the next 8 years, we have the opportunity to reach even further than that. We have established within our fleet organization life cycles for every type of vehicle. And so by knowing in advance what vehicles will be up for replacement each year, that's how we build our capital plan. We're taking an approach to look at those vehicles that are up for replacement, We work with operations heavily because we are a support organization to them. Our whole purpose is to make sure that they have the right tool they need to help keep the lights on here in Houston, as well as gas flowing in our gas jurisdiction. So we're actually looking, I should have said that in the beginning, not only here in Houston, but we have gas utilities in Louisiana, Mississippi, other parts within Texas, Indiana, Ohio, and Minnesota. So we have a very large footprint, a lot of extreme weather conditions. So there's a lot of factors that go into play to selecting which of these vehicles that are up for replacement are actually good EV candidates. Then add on top of that the supply chain constraints that we have currently. It's difficult to get any vehicle right now, ICE, hybrid, or electric. So we are working with that as well to come up with a good plan year to year. So we have, I think, a good strategy over how we're going to approach this over 10 years, but it's going to take a lot of refined analysis in the details each year. So our project team is divided into 5 groups. The first is electric vehicles, who is doing what I've been talking about, looking at the actual vehicles that we'll be able to convert to electric. Then we have a charging infrastructure design team that's going to look at how we're going to charge these vehicles within our own facilities. Then we have a facilities group that is going to look at, with all of this additional capacity, do we have the electric infrastructure to our facilities that we need? Then we have a reporting team that is working on coming up with the criteria that we need to be reporting on. Right now, we track fueling. We have internal fuel stations as well as fuel cards that our employees can use at public gas stations. We track that fuel to the vehicle, so we need to be doing the same thing for charging costs, because that's how we are able to account correctly for the cost of the transportation. So the reporting team is going to figure all of that out, and then we have our change management team, which is helping really champion this. I think that's one thing that we have a great advantage in, is that we have a lot of people that are really supportive of this effort within CenterPoint. So there's a lot of excitement about electric vehicles. There's a lot of collaboration across the groups. We have a lot of CenterPoint folks here in the room today, and a large majority of those folks are on our project team, so we have a lot of enthusiasm internally.
You talked a lot more about than just the vehicles, right? There's a lot to this. There's goal setting, there's reporting, and then there's obviously change management and infrastructure. Where do you start? Who are the first people that you should be speaking with to get this moving and to get electrification to happen?
Well, it's probably different for different organizations. We had a lot of enthusiasm from executive leadership from the beginning, so that really helped, I guess, spur this on. There was a lot of industry groups were a part of that. There was a lot of discussion on that level as well. So I think we're taking the approach that it's really asset driven by the fleet, and so we're looking at it that way. I think there are other organizations that look at it more of a site-by-site level, because maybe they're more constrained in the amount of electric infrastructure that they think they'll be able to get to support electrification of their fleet. So I think it's really different for probably each company. CenterPoint has unique challenges, and then we have challenges that every corporation is going to face, like supply chain.
And you talk about assets, right? And how CenterPoint's focusing now on sedans and light duty vehicles, just because that's what the market calls for today. But that market's moving. There's no electric options for bucket trucks today. But Kent and I were saying backstage, on your report, there were EVs that aren't even in the market anymore. And since we completed that report a little over a year ago, there have been so many other options that have come about. And I just think it's phenomenal how fast this industry is moving, how much investment has gone in, whether it's at the government level or on the private side as well. These OEMs are really committing to pumping out these options that can fit into your fleet and fleets just like yours.
They are, and I'll add that we are piloting an all-electric bucket truck. So they have currently ICE chassis with electric aerial units or hybrid aerial units, and we have ordered an all-electric bucket truck. There are several other utilities that are piloting the project as well. So we should receive that hopefully at the end of this year. And our hope is that that gives us an opportunity to be in the feedback loop with that manufacturer so that our linemen can test that out and see how well it fits into their daily operations. And if there are design changes that we can make to make that a better tool for us in the future, then that's a great opportunity to help shape the market into what we would like to see.
That's great. I want to hand over to Kent. Kent's with NextEra, and we've worked with EIQ, which is a NextEra company for quite a bit now for our fleet electrification program. And through our fleet electrification program, we've looked at about 15,000 public and private fleet vehicles that operate in the Houston area. And I think we found somewhere around 70% are technically feasible, meaning there's a vehicle that exists on the marketplace that meets a range requirement and the vehicle type to replace that existing ICE vehicle. And then somewhere around 25-30% are economically feasible, meaning that they're less expensive to own and operate, total cost of ownership over the lifetime of that vehicle. And again, the market's moving so fast, and there's so many new vehicles coming to the market, new technologies, that I'm sure if we reran those 15,000 vehicles today, that those numbers are changing. Can you? Oh no, go ahead.
Yeah, just to comment on that. We have rerun in some markets those kind of data from 2019, then to 2020, 2021, 2022, and it's remarkable how much that total feasibility has gone up. So the economic front, the economic feasibility, the total cost of ownership is just reaching parity in major categories of vehicles, and then the battery life is getting longer in a lot of models, so the technical feasibility is jumping up, and it's really encouraging to see. And when I hear goals like 50 by 30, I don't shake my head at all. We know from this study and others that that's absolutely feasible if we have the right stakeholders in the mix.
And I think fleet vehicles have very unique requirements, right, that the average driver probably doesn't have. Can you speak to some of the other projects that NextEra or maybe even EIQ have that are helping lead this electrification journey and helping organizations figure out whether they're on the vehicle side or on that infrastructure side, how to bring electrification to their and other organizations?
Sure, and so I recognize that I'm not necessarily in the home audience in Florida, and I'm in the great state of Texas, so I never take for granted that a lot of people may not know who NextEra are. We're one of the larger companies that many people have never heard of. We're actually, in addition to owning Florida Power and Light, we are the largest clean infrastructure developer, owner, operator in the world. We operate over 40,000 megawatts of wind, solar, and stationary batteries. That's traditionally been our grid scale business for large commercial customers as well as utilities. But we also serve Fortune 1000 companies. We've done hundreds of distributed projects, solar, battery storage, and as companies and state agency, government agencies want to go fully decarbon, a huge challenge is electrification. So about 2 years ago, we made the strategic acquisition of eMobility, which is a best-in-class total cost of ownership and fleet feasibility planning tool. So you can ingest all the vehicle data with readily available fuel data, fuel card data, or telematics, and vehicle by vehicle, there'll be a suggested vehicle conversion and some analytics on how much money you're either going to save over time or lose over time. Fortunately, the first bucket is growing relative to the second. And that was really the first step, because we recognize that this is a long journey for anyone who's going to electrify. If you have 1,000 vehicles or 100 vehicles or 10,000 vehicles, the common denominator is you're not going to convert instantly everything all at once. Even if the vehicles were there and you could get allocation, this is going to be a long journey. So this smart planning of where, in which vehicles, and in which order, which depots to start with, we think is really critical. And so we've been happy to work with Evolve Houston and to find local fleets, including CenterPoint, to do that analytics. But then beyond that, I mean, fundamentally, we're an infrastructure company. So we view our jobs as to allow commercial and government fleets to press the easy button when it comes to actual electrifying. So there's various forms that infrastructure is going to take. So the most straightforward is you've got a depot today. That depot has space and electric capacity for the amount of chargers, for the converted fleet, and we'll come on and we're able to take that same EIQ software and analyze what the smart charging protocols are going to be in the future so that we can underwrite a charging as a service, dollar per month or even dollar per kilowatt hour offer. So there's no capital up front. We're taking care of everything. We're making it easy and doing a turnkey conversion of whatever depot there is. Now, that solution's not going to fit every fleet in every place because there's some fleets that may be leasing their property. There's some fleets that may be on property that doesn't have a high service capacity, and you'd be looking at punitive upgrades. So we also have a range of off-site fleet-focused solutions. So some which we're going to be spearheading are where we would acquire and are hoping to do in this market several acres of land that can be subscribed for multiple fleets with different characteristics to get that average cost down for fleet. And then on the longer distance highway, Class 8 trucking, which is coming as well, we have announced a joint venture partnership with Daimler Trucks North America and BlackRock to institute a national network of supercharger highway truck stops powered by green energy.
That was great, very comprehensive. And I think on the charging component, there's one piece that's missing, right? We covered on-site fleet charging. We covered the off-site prescribed acreage fleet charging. But not everyone, or not every fleet vehicle returns to a depot at the end of the day. Some of those vehicles go back to someone's home at the end of the day. And I guess in that case, question for the panel, what are some ways to approach that or think about how to electrify your fleet if you have vehicles that are going to people's homes at night, not necessarily a depot?
Have some thoughts on that. Travis, you might? Yeah, I mean, you can look at it at the employee level, right? The employee wants a reliable service. They don't want disruption to their homes. And from a fleet perspective, it's about selecting the right employee that's actually right for the solution. So if an employee lives in a multifamily unit, right now the technology is a little challenged to get one charger dedicated to that person. If the employee doesn't own their home and is likely to be moving, or the employee's likely to have turnover, that may not be the best candidate. But I think there's an analytics piece to figuring out, all right, if we're going to do 10% electrification in the next 2 years, what are the 10% of those take-home employees that are right for that? And then on the fleet side, there's a question of how do you figure out how much to reimburse that employee? You don't want to do too little, upset the employee. You don't want to do too much. You might run into some tax issues. So we are in the background working on some of those solutions and can talk about that.
Awesome. All right. Well, I'll hand it over to Travis then. Travis, you've been instrumental in helping Evolve and really my program specifically come up with RISE and really help us through determining how to build that regional infrastructure strategy for electrification. But you didn't do it alone, and we didn't do it alone. We have this ecosystem, this network that we can tap into to make these projects possible. Can you talk a little bit about maybe the value of being able to rely on this network and these other players as well to do these amazing projects?
Yeah, absolutely. The RISE report was a group effort. And energy transition and systems transformation in general is going to be a team sport. And we asked a simple question in the beginning of doing the RISE report: how are we going to make this happen? And by this, we mean, how are we going to get the electric charging infrastructure that we need to fuel all of these vehicles coming online by 2030? Does anybody know what the RISE report says the EV penetration is going to be in the Houston region by 2050? Anyone? I know it's a page turner, guys, so you can say, you don't remember? It's almost 9 million vehicles. 9 million vehicles. And by 2030, so that's 2050, but by 2030, the investment allocation required for both the DC fast charging and the level 2 is going to reach up to $420 million. And so when I heard about the entire state getting allocated 408, I thought, how much of that can we get for Houston? Why did we do this report? We did this report because cities, corporates, governments, stakeholders, they need bargaining chips to get those federal funds. They need to arm their senators and their congressmen, congresspeople to go out and find that funding allocation from the federal government. And when state agencies receive that, we need bargaining chips again to say, we know where the chargers are going to go, we know how much capacity is needed. Now, the reason why this is a group sport is because Shell, as a charging provider, as a power provider, we can't do it alone. We don't own the grid. We don't know how long it's going to take to upgrade certain facilities for these depots to have fully electrified fleets. But what we do know is that partners like CenterPoint Energy need to be at the table while we're doing these studies. Does anybody know? This is another quiz. Does anybody know how much power we're going to need by 2030 for those chargers? The excess power that was projected by the electrotempo tool, 350 megawatts. 350 megawatts. Now, Leslie and I were talking about, well, if we did that in one or two substations, that's not as big of a deal. But when you distribute that across the entire grid, all over Greater Houston, that's a lot of little tiny tweaks that become very expensive. Very time consuming. So these ideas that we're coming up with at this point is to prepare all the stakeholders at the table to say, whoa, we got a lot of work ahead of us. And we know that we have to work together, and we know it's not just going to be the public funding. That's good assurance. That's good kickstart money to buy down some of the risk. It's not just going to be corporate funding to do charging as a service like Shell would like to do for any of the fleet customers that are interested. But it's going to be that group effort and that group understanding of how big the challenge is ahead of us. So that's why Shell finds it really valuable to be in the commercialization and infrastructure working group, because we can see what's the size of the prize. What can we carve out as a corporate? Who do we need as partners within the city and the utility area to actually make this future viable, make it economical, and make it just enjoyable for people to start choosing the right thing in their lives?
That's great. And I think it definitely expands beyond just RISE and just the infrastructure. The whole electrification journey requires teamwork. Teamwork, participation, getting people to the table, getting people to play, and play with each other. It's a lot of work, and no one organization can do everything. So I have another question for the panel. The two big questions or challenges or attacks that I hear when I talk about widespread electrification, especially here in Texas, are number one, the grid can't handle it, right? There's no way we can power all of these cars. And number two, what benefit is the environment getting if we're just replacing these tailpipe emissions with smokestack emissions at a power plant? So I'm curious, what do you guys, how do you address that, right? How do you address the grid can't handle it, or the power production can't handle it, or the distribution can't handle it? And it's dirty, right? Like, we're just burning coal instead of gasoline.
I can answer the emissions aspect of it. Actually, Ann Shu, who is our CEO, has done a study on this was a few years back, which is available in the public domain, So far, the emissions study aspect has been, two parallel tracks going on. One is, what is the effect of emissions from ICE-powered cars? And then what is the effect of emissions on traditional energy producers, right? But now with renewable energy coming into place, EV adoption rates increasing, I think that is kind of bridging the gap between the two. It's the study, not only this study, but there are a lot of other studies which have clearly proven that, just because you have to produce more energy with, coal and other sources, does not mean that you are taking it from one place and putting it into another. Because, as you know, from the Evolve study, 47% of CHG emissions in the Houston area is from transportation. So naturally, electrifying fleets and cars and all that is going to decrease that drastically, and that proportion is going to be much higher compared to what is going to be produced because of the combination of the renewable energy also playing a big factor into it.
So just with respect to the tailpipe thing, I mean, we can just look and have a data-driven argument. So Texas overall as a grid is the 30th cleanest state grid. So right about in the middle there. So it's not Wyoming, it's not Washington State, but it's still right in the middle, and it's getting cleaner because there's been a real revolution in renewables, particularly wind within the state. So some of the studies that we've executed and done have shown that each conversion of the vehicle reduces overall emissions by about half. So the argument's almost never going to be true that an electrification of a vehicle is just trading one for the other. With respect to the energy grid, I mean, we're a renewable developer. We love the idea of ground load, and we built a lot of renewables in this state and others, and we see it as a big opportunity to further decarbonize the grid and build it right. There's a vast new load coming up. The other part is let's work with various stakeholders, either the companies that have the fleets or the local jurisdictions, to actually site charging where it makes sense for the grid. Instead of just jamming chargers and charging load where the vehicles happen to be today, let's help adapt the system to put the charging where it makes most sense and is not going to have a challenging bottleneck impact on the grid.
A couple of things that we keep coming back to is education. So, everyone, we've been telling people for decades and decades to go this with Texas. Here's how you maintain your vehicle, right? For the internal combustion in your vehicle. All those same types of things will have to happen for electric vehicles. And I think the biggest one is when to charge your car. There are times that are most beneficial to charge it if you have access to charging at home. There are times when you shouldn't. And every electric vehicle, I think, today comes with a timer. So you don't have to sit there and watch it. People say, how long you take to charge your car? Yeah, you can watch it. I can plug it in and walk away. I let the timer do it. So there's a lot of education that goes along there that will help, because at night in Texas, that's when the wind blows the hardest. We have the most renewable wind power of any state at night, and it's mostly unused. Now, it's not always in the right parts of the state. That's something we can work on. But when these vehicles roll out, that's a part of the education part of it, where we can help people. When you're lucky on the vehicle in this part of the state, you get to benefit from this and not have to do anything about it. It's just there. It's already available. So there'll be a lot of education, lots of aha moments for folks, and we're going to try and make those as plain as possible. But we have access to more information now than we've ever had. So it's no longer a black box of how much electricity is in the grid when you look at the ERCOT side. They have really good dashboards. You go out there and see for yourself. And I encourage my kids when they go to charge their car, go look at the dashboard. Should you be charging your car then? Or should you wait until after 8 and use the timer? So it's something that people just have to do, and I think every coach can make it.
I can add. Oh, do you want to go first?
Oh, well, I'm stepping out of my role in fleet a little bit into electric operations, but from CenterPoint's perspective, from strictly poles and wires, I think we can be ready, like others have touched on. We don't have the generation, so we don't we don't control or play into that mix at all, but we can be ready. We just need information from customers. So we've got several initiatives going on within CenterPoint to address that, to make sure that we get as much information as possible for planning and analysis purposes. And we are also working from a customer experience perspective, making sure we have the process in place so that when others that are electrifying their fleet the way we are, or even individuals needing a charging station at their home but may need upgrades, that we have that process in place that makes it as easy as possible from them.
I would just add that to somebody who is skeptical, somebody who is still questioning, we can think out to 2030, 2035. The grid resources are getting much smaller in urban areas, and they're very distributed in your homes and my homes and businesses. And this opportunity that we have with the digital backbone of our entire electrical grid is to start to operate all those tiny little resources like an EV battery or an in-home battery at the scale of the wholesale market. And that's kind of why I love working at Shell right now, is because we have both of those ends of the spectrum. And so it's not a question of are we ready, it's what are we building towards? Are we going to work towards a sophisticated, elegant, multinodal system, or is it going to continue to be the one-way grid that we've always had? So that's something that I think is the hopeful, is the futurist kind of thinking that we need as we continue to build this system. But how do we get there? Right? Because these EV purchases that are being made are only keeping up with what the OEM production is. And we're getting smaller orders of 20 buses, orders of 5 buses, orders of 20 fleet cars. People need time to test these things. And in doing so, they're oftentimes not hitting the ceiling of the electrical service at their site. So we're only beginning to see what the challenges are. And Shell has worked with the city of San Diego to install solar and battery microgrids with EV charging options to start to take that next step. It's an acupunctural step, but it's something that says we have a solution for now, before the grid can actually do its bigger transformation, before we can link all the little assets with the wholesale trading. So there's solutions out there. Anybody who's interested should not be shy about going forward with their plans. The solutions providers are here, they're hungry to serve, and there's a lot of capital, a lot of money out there, so it doesn't have to be a big upfront investment. The burden doesn't have to be on the customer to do this transition alone.
That's great. Thank you, Travis. And I think that's a really good place to end it, right? There's this very bright future to look forward to, and there are definitely people today that are kind of poking at that, and they're getting there. They're getting ready to be a part of that electric revolution. I want to thank you guys so much for participating in this panel, and I want to thank the audience as well for sticking around. Thank you, guys.
Thank you all. How about a hand for yourself and the panel as they exit this way? Thank you so much.